pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made whether perceived by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes, January 9th, 14th, 24th, and February 19th. Everybody received that packet?
How you know that I did?
Yes.
Anybody have any comments or questions? Do you want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next item is the RFP number 19-4, presentation from bidder Huneman and award of contract for real estate brokerage services.
I think Mike Dijon was here.
Great. Sure,
Yeah. Sure.
absolutely.
You want to sit at that end, maybe Mike? Sure. Because the TV is.
I never really had an opportunity to see his RFP.
We'll just sit on one side of the.
I'll move it that way, don't worry about it.
It's all right.
Kathy's office. Thank you for coming this evening.
Well, I'm glad I was able to make it. I know we had a cancellation the last meeting, so we submitted our proposal, and I think as we indicated in there, we had a strong interest in the park last year, and we were engaged with 16 or 17 prospects. We did have 2 offers to purchase. We think interest will remain strong, in the year coming up, and we're going to continue to do the things that we've been doing, which is basically we're doing direct mail and follow-up calls to companies in the region, I-95 South, South Coast region. We're also keeping the park and the opportunities there in front of the co-brokerage community throughout Boston, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Most of the leads actually come from companies that are representing, brokers that are representing companies that are, out looking for space. We continue to work through Mass Econ, Massachusetts Economic Alliance, and to keep the park registered as, one of the top sites in the state that is available for development. I think that's one of the very unique things about the park. Right now there are very few opportunities for companies looking for large amounts of land for built-to-suit opportunities with utilities already in place and MEPA approvals, and I think that's a credit to the Redevelopment Authority that they made the investments there in that infrastructure. So we continue to basically put that brand out there as the park's brand as being truly shovel-ready. So, we're optimistic, provided the national and regional economy can remain strong, that we'll continue to be able to bring prospects before the board, and then you can make your consideration as to who you want to move forward with.
Thank you. Laurie, do you have any questions? Michelle, any questions for him?
When you reach out to developers, is there any particular emphasis that's being put out there, or is it more of a general, portrayal of the property?
Well, we emphasize, and primarily we're marketing to companies, the users themselves. We've talked in the past about, in some parks, whether the board would be interested in having a developer come in and put up a spec building, and then they would subsequently get tenants. But so far, that hasn't been the direction that you all have chosen to go in, and I understand that. So we're primarily dealing with end users, with the companies that are actually going to make the widgets and create the jobs and so on and so forth. And the things we're really emphasizing in the parks case is, as I already mentioned, the fact that it's ready to go. We talk about the labor force availability, which is still, very much a big deal in Massachusetts, and the fact that, Amazon made the decision to locate here because of the shovel-ready nature of the park and what they determined to be a very good place from which to attract employees. And I think having Amazon here does help the brand a lot, because I think other companies look at that and they say, well, you know, Amazon has a pretty selective process for, you know, deciding where they want to locate, and the fact if they pick Fall River, then there must be something here. So we, you know, so that's basically what we emphasize. You know, it may be, it may be this year might be a good year to update some of the employment and job availability. A few years ago, when we were talking to a life science company, we identified, and we did this work through, I think it was UMass Dartmouth, that they identified the fact that there were, I think it was 4,000 people currently employed in biomanufacturing that lived within a 30-mile radius of the park, and I think a lot of companies that we were talking to were surprised about that. And I think it's those kind of statistics which I think are valuable, and we may this year, we may want to take a look at trying to update some of that, but that's how we position it.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you. I remember just a few months ago, you were in front of us again, giving us a presentation on the marketing that you do for us, and I think it looks excellent. I'd like to make a motion that we accept as our fee and continue working with them for the property that we have available.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate the opportunity, and we look forward to working with you all in 2019.
So do we.
Yep.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the update on the downtown and waterfront urban renewal plans from Harriman. We have a slide presentation here.
I'm just getting it back up. There's a slight glitch on the computer, but
Thanks, John.
it's now been solved. So, thank you very much for having me. My name is Emily Ennis. I'm an associate and senior urban planner with Harriman, and I'm on the project manager for this project. I've met with you before, but this is time to give you all an update and let you know where we are. And as always, it's a pleasure to be here. So we've been working on two separate urban renewal plans for you, the waterfront and the downtown. And what I want to do is run through, just because it's been a while since I was last here, what the plans are, what they mean, and where the process stands and where it should be going. So we started the plans back in 2016, was the original, and actually should I have this in front of me at all times? Okay. We started it back in 2016, and where we are now is actually partway through the approval process. So you, the Redevelopment Authority, have already taken action to determine the necessity, which means that the conditions exist for an urban renewal plan. Your solicitor has gone through and made sure that it has met all of the applicable laws and regulations, and we're now in the city approval process. So I'm going to walk you through all of that. I'm going to talk about how we got to where we were in terms of the beginning parts of the master plan, what's going on with the two urban renewal plans in terms of the recommendations, and then just sort of point you to the important parts of the plan, and also, of course, anybody who's listening. So urban renewal plans now are very different from the way they were in the 50s and 60s, where it was very much a top-down process. The federal government had a ton of money, and so cities all over the country did actually a lot of clearing, and in some cases, not a lot of building after the clearing. So they used eminent domain to take properties that they determined to be blighted. And some projects were successful and many projects weren't. So what we try to do now with urban renewal is it's far more of a bottoms up, in that there's a significant public process, which is part of what this approval process is, actually the ending part of that public process. But it's very much about how do you get private investment to come into an area. So the public role, rather than being clearance of significant areas, is much more targeted. It's looking at particular areas that could be what we call catalytic projects. So the idea that the public entity, in this case yourselves, the Redevelopment Authority, are looking for places where if they make a targeted public investment, private investment is likely to follow. So as we went through the plans, the goal was to find areas where you could make those targeted investments and what that would mean in terms of follow-on after effects. So in this case, what happens is after the city council approves a plan, it goes to DHCD as an application, and DHCD has that final state approval. Once the plan has been approved by DHCD, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development, then it's an active plan and you can take actions under that plan. So where we are now, I talked about the dates. So roughly this time last year, actually, you did your determination of necessity, and you had your review for consistency. DHCD has done 2 interim reviews already, one in December and one in March, right after your review. The planning board has to determine that it's in conformance with the master plan, which they did last May. City Council held an initial public hearing in June. They have referred it to their Economic Development and Tourism Committee, and I believe I'm meeting again with them next week.
On the, Monday.
Monday, yep. And so I assume after that, assuming that they're happy with it, they would send it back to the council. Once they've done that and once the council has voted, it goes to DHCD, and 60 days after the application is sent to them, they should have their final review. Now, they've done 2 reviews already. I'm just going to call out the dates here because I'm a little bit worried that when we send it to them, because the last round of action was last June, I am worried that they're going to ask that some of this stuff be updated, which would be a little bit of a problem. So, because there's a significant amount of back data in there, so depending on what they want updated, that could be a little bit of an issue. So I want to warn you now in case that comes back. And what the types of things that could be updated would be assessor's data if there's been a revaluation in the intervening period, and some of the financial data that our colleagues at FX and Associates did in terms of determining demand. Is now a little bit out of date. So they may accept it because it's within the year, but just to warn you, that's a possibility. So in that approval process, DHCD has to make certain required findings. I won't read them all, but what I want to do is just point you to the sections on the right-hand side. That's where you find that backup information in the plan for DHCD's findings. So the key one is that top one, that the project area would not by private enterprise alone and without either government subsidy or the exercise of governmental powers be made available for urban renewal. So in other words, what we're saying is that these areas are areas that have not been addressed by the private market over time, and that there are conditions that mean that it can't be. And that's where your determination of necessity came into, and that's the basis for these being urban renewal plans. It doesn't mean that every building within an area has problems, but it means that there are enough of them that haven't been addressed and haven't been able to be addressed that the area qualifies. So in looking at this, we always start with the existing planning documents as our base, and in fact, as the city of Fall River, have done an awful lot of planning, which is great. So we went through all of the different plans. You'll see there's a summary in the urban renewal plans where we looked through and said, okay, what is applicable to the waterfront and what is applicable to the downtown. We also looked at plans done by other agencies or other groups, including Mass DOT and SERPAD, your regional planning agency. So I'm going to break it down a little bit for those of you who might be in the back. This is the waterfront area here, and this is the downtown area here. So part of what we were trying to do, and one of the reasons that you see this junction right here where they're right next to each other, is consider how they could inform each other, what was going on in the downtown versus what was going on in the waterfront, that there would be both physical connections, which is hard because of the topography, but also economic, tourism, just general development connections between the two of them. So the plans refer to each other. It was one of the benefits of doing them simultaneously. So for the waterfront, the key piece was the fact that Route 79 is being redesigned now. At the time we started the plan, it was still conceptually, but you're actually moving forward with that. In fact, I've had a meeting with Trans Systems to discuss the plan. And what that does is something completely unique in an American city, which is you're creating 10 acres of land in a previously developed area. And so the main point and the main reason for doing the waterfront plan is, what do you do with those 10 acres? This plan is designed to get you there, so that once those are created, and it will take a little while longer, but once those are created, you have the ability to react to that and manage that process. And so the idea is to create a mixed-use area along that. It's actually a strip that makes up the 10 acres that would support different housing models, economic development, jobs, tourism, and most importantly, in some ways, reconnect the waterfront to the neighborhoods, because Route 79 is an elevated highway, cut the neighborhoods off from the waterfront. So even though there'll still be a topographical difference between the two, the idea of lining up the streets across what will be a new boulevard so that they connect into neighborhood streets was an important component of this. Then in secondary goals is, now that you have that 10 acres of land, how do you create an integrated waterfront all the way from the Braga Bridge to Weaver's Cove? And then how do you link it to the downtown? And in that, we tried to think about how they would have different identities, so that there would be a specific reason that you went to the downtown and a specific reason that you went to the waterfront, and it would bring people to come to both of those. So, and by people, that's current residents, current and future employers, future residents, and tourists. So. And then the Shell Oil site, of course, is one of those areas that is difficult for the private market to address, and it's sort of bookmarking at one end. So considering how that could be developed over time, and we've got a couple of options of how that could be reparcelized, were the FRRA or somebody else to acquire it. And then also thinking about that, of course, this is where South Coast Rail is coming in. So extending, what happens when the commuter rail line comes in, helping that out if necessary, and then thinking about how development should happen around that. So what you'll see in both plans, you have an implementation plan in both, and because of the type of urban renewal plan this is, where it's over a very large area, what you'll see is your goals and responsibilities under the implementation plan, but there's also things that the city needs to do and the planning board needs to do. And so that's all called out here. For those who haven't seen the plan yet, it identifies what the actions are, and it's broken down into different types of actions, including regulatory, acquisition, and disposition of land. Those two are primarily the focus of the Redevelopment Authority. Regulatory would be more City Council and Planning Board. And then also thinking about additional planning activities. This is a broad enough plan that not everything could be done within the scope of one project. So that's, for example, looking in more depth at the Shell Oil site would be an additional planning activity. And then just thinking about over time the other things that could happen. So it's the actions here, the responsibilities here, and then roughly the phase. We divided it into 3 phases. Phase 1 is about the first 3 years. Phase 2 takes you up to about 10 years, and Phase 3 is after that. So the life of an urban renewal plan is 20 years. And then this lists the acquisitions. So one of the things the Redevelopment Authority can do with an approved urban renewal plan is, of course, acquiring land. And with a state-approved urban renewal plan, the Redevelopment Authority does have the power of eminent domain. That does not mean that the acquisitions must be using the eminent domain tool. They could certainly be bought on the open market. It could be what's known colloquially as a friendly eminent domain, which is often used to clear title, or a friendly taking. But and you also don't have to acquire all of these properties. What DHCD does require is that the acquisitions that are being considered be listed. And so what you'll see here is the parcel ID, and this is true of both plans, the address, the owner that was known at the time the plan was done, roughly how many acres, and the assessed valuation. Now, DHCD used to require that you do an appraisal for each property as part of the urban renewal plan. For now, they accept with a waiver the assessed value, but if you were to acquire a property, you would still have to do 2 independent appraisals of the property as part of the overall acquisition process. That process is a public process, so just so you know. So again, we've listed everything here. Your goal in the acquisitions and thinking about them is what properties could be those catalytic projects we talked about. And ensuring that the properties, whether you acquire them or whether somebody else, the current owner develops them, or somebody else, the current owner sells to somebody else and they develop them, that they're developed consistent with the goals of the urban renewal plan. So as you go through the urban renewal plan, obviously you see the overall goals that we just talked about at a high level, but you also have design guidelines, and those are set up so that if the planning board is reviewing a project within the urban renewal plan, they can use those design guidelines as part of their review, and that allows those properties to be developed consistent with other properties to meet the goals of the urban renewal plan. So in the downtown, similar sort of a structure, as you'll see as we go through, but here the primary goal was filling in your sort of missing teeth along North Main Street and South Main Street, and that is a sort of colloquial planning term for where you have gaps in the buildings. So as you look at how this area has changed over time, one of the things that I really like about North and South Main Streets is you do still have a lot of good older building stock. Some of it's in better condition than other, and you do have issues with vacancies on the upper floors. So, but some communities, those missing teeth are a lot larger. And you still have a lot to create the sort of, or maintain the original contact. So as we looked at it, it was how do you infill the lots that are now used for parking or other purposes, and then obviously if you fill those in with the building, you have to think about where the parking goes, and there's a discussion of that in the plan. And then, so once North and South Main Street, those spines that are, it's basically a long spine that hinges at City Hall. Once those are filled in, Phase 2 is really thinking about infill in the neighborhoods around it. And then Phase 3 is looking up at Bedford Street and Purchase Street and in that area. I want to say that part of what you, the Redevelopment Authority, can do is public infrastructure, and that's often something you see paired when a developer comes in, whether it's you or the city. You can do public infrastructure to support that development. So the idea of streetscapes, public parks, looking to grants, and we'll talk about funding in a little bit. Very similar structure. There's responsibilities for both yourselves and also the city and the planning board primarily in looking at how to fulfill some of these actions. A smaller list of acquisitions. The downtown is also a smaller area. And then just going into more detail in the implementation plan, the very similar thing. These are based, for your pieces, on the powers of the Redevelopment Authority, Massachusetts MGL 121B. So your regulatory activities, thinking about the design guidelines and standards and design review of projects, that can be either you or the planning board. We've set it up for the planning board now. Requiring other regulatory standards for private development. These are all your powers. Historic and architectural preservation. Then the primary role of a redevelopment authority, acquisition, development, and disposition, and what you can do there, including applying for and accepting grants and loans, and, bless you, and issuing bonds, the public infrastructure activities I just mentioned, and then you can undertake planning activities such as urban renewal plans, but also more specific strategic plans. Then we talked about the other activities a little bit, and the fact that in many of these cases you'll need to work in partnership with the city council and other boards. We talked about the phasing. So this is a breakdown in more detail about the implementation plan, where you can see how your roles, the city council and the planning board interact. So you can see city council, for example, and planning board need to work together for adopting the zoning changes. You and the city council can do infrastructure improvements. You've got the redevelopment planning activities, where city council and planning board are doing land use changes. And then your piece in sort of the future approvals, that you have a regular review of progress and amending the plan as necessary. The city council would approve major plan amendments, and the planning board, before that approval, would determine that those conform to the city's master plan. So the three of you have an ongoing role in the process. And then finally, the all-important funding sources on this. We talked about bonds. Obviously, both yourselves and the city can issue bonds, and the city has funds, both operating and capital, although I will say, like all municipalities, those tend to be pretty limited. So what we've done is, in both plans, we've identified some sources from the Commonwealth. MassWorks, I think, is the most frequently known, or the most well-known. Chapter 90, of course, the use of historic tax credits for some of these eligible buildings. You do have some brownfield sites, or potentially environmentally contaminated sites. Commonwealth Places is a new one with mass development that can be used for placemaking strategies, and we've recommended a number in the plan. And then federal sources, the most recent, of course, is the Opportunity Zone program, which allows for investment in those areas that have been designated as opportunity zones, and that's true in these areas. But also then to pair up with the state historic tax credits, there are also federal historic tax credits. And that's the basic update. So from your perspective, you've actually taken all the actions that you need to at this point, but just to let you know where we were, that it's in the city council's hand for approval. But I also wanted to let you know I'm just a little worried about the age of the data.
So theoretically, that should move forward yesterday.
Well,
Last yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to try to continue with our job and move this forward,
Yeah.
hopefully on Monday. You know, it was a good thing you put up there powers of historic and architectural preservation, because there is concerns, and I know that the city planner has seen them. We do have a couple of members of CPA that wanted to come and had a couple of questions.
great. So,
So if we.
I'll do my best.
Invite Jim to come down and have a seat. And you can talk to all of us, and we have just some concerns about the historic portion of these plans.
Carol, thank you. Jim Stoll, Vice Chancellor in Rock Street, represent the Preservation Society of Fall River.
yeah, I think
Be very careful.
With the balance
Yeah.
I appreciate you inviting me to tonight's meeting. Mostly, I appreciate this plan because I think it takes into consideration historic preservation and architecture, which of course, is what we obsess about. And so, what I'd really like to do is two things. One, encourage a relationship with the RDA and Preservation Society and/or the local historic commission, because we have tools and interests that are historically minded, that are really overlooked a lot of times across the city. And then second of all, just to say that I think it is important that with this development that the Preservation Society, or at least the Historic Commission, should be involved with the process. And so with that, thank you for inviting us. And then there were some recent work done in the city that didn't follow this plan, which was too bad. At first, I actually initially, in some of my anger at the plan, I'm like, wow, I can't believe the plan recommended this, and it wasn't. I think if the plan had been in effect already, some of the things that made us unhappy wouldn't have happened, hopefully. Because it's important, we need to see more congruent, historically sensitive work done, especially around the historic districts and neighborhoods in the city. This is an historical city. It really is. I know people that live in the city, they don't appreciate that. They see these stupid towers every day of the week, and they pay no mind to it. But there's a big difference between Fall River and more modern towns and cities across the country. And we're at a point where we can really make a difference, and that should be part of how we create Fall River's identity. So I'll leave it at that, and I just want to say thank you again for including us. And please keep our name and number, and if we can help.
Thank you very much, Jen, and I do agree with you. I think, any preservation in the city should be included in all of these, and I encourage you to come a week from today at 5:30, to the next phase.
In this room.
In this room, to come and help us support and push this phase through, and I agree. I'll keep you updated on all of our meetings and any step of the way. So thank you, and Jim Souza for attending tonight.
Thank you.
And Emily, I want to thank you very much. I know I've been a part of this forever, it seems, but thank you for coming and updating Michelle and Lori Ann on this. I think we did have a couple of other questions. Bill, I received this letter on some of these properties.
Yeah, I can address some of that.
Wanted to get off the list.
Right,
I
and
just don't want these citizens to know we are listening to them.
right, we are. I'm forwarding all of the emails, and we're going to be producing a. Harriman's going to produce take the water, and they're almost, I think, exclusively in the waterfront district, and we're going to be taking that. I've reviewed them with Emily, and we've a lot of what they're doing is some of them are already in the process of redeveloping. They're really concerned because of their lenders. So I've sent them letters back that says that we've reviewed this from a staff perspective. We're going to be recommending that their properties be removed. And that we're going to be presenting a map that shows here's the properties they've requested to be removed, because they're actually implementing, a lot of them are implementing one or several of the activities that are recommended in the plan. So there's really no need to put them on the takings list. So that's kind of where we are. So we're going to recommend that those properties be taken off the list. And I think that's been a contentious issue. I think one of the things everyone gets hung up on takings, and if you've seen any of the meetings I've been at, I said I think that's a option of last resort that you as a group really want to do. I mean, what you really want to do is help a property owner and a developer and broker a relationship. And by having this plan, also opens up funding sources that they would not have available. And so that's really what it is. But the takings is one of the tools, but it's the tool of last resort. And it's only going to be for those extraordinary properties that, if in fact that you do it at all. And that's kind of what I've reiterated. So the people that have requested to be off because they're in the process of redeveloping, we're just going to recommend from a staff perspective that they be removed. And I know that it would be nice if one or two, if several of you could attend, make sure we don't have quorum issue with the Redevelopment Authority, or if you think there will be a quorum, to maybe work with your council and notice it, just to make, cover it. But that's something I think you should discuss with your council. And other than that, 5:30 on the 4th. I know that several developers, one developer in particular in the downtown plan, it's the old school, he's very adamant that, some of his funding is being tied up with this and is in jeopardy. So, I think hopefully he'll be there to talk to the council to look at moving forward with the plan.
Thank you, Bill. Any members have any questions for him at this point?
Yeah, originally, how many properties were subject to takings originally, and how many have you actually taken off the plan at this point?
Well, we haven't taken any off. I think there's about 4 or 5 that have requested to be off. That's all. So it's not a lot.
What we thought we'd do, just No, I'm doing it. What we thought we'd do to make sure that we aren't going back and forth and having multiple copies of the plan is we'll prepare a map showing which ones are coming off. Then if the city council agrees and approves, then we'll update the document before it goes to DHCD. But they're starting to get enough versions out there. I didn't want people getting confused as to which one they were reviewing.
Yeah.
So,
Right, because you're right, there are people that are very concerned and they're like panicking, and
right.
I think their minds need to be relieved. And I do believe that, you know, we need to integrate what we have with what we're going to have. You know, you don't necessarily tear down and throw away.
Right.
So, yeah, definitely incorporating is the best avenue for me, in my mind.
So,
Absolutely. So I think just to assure that the document is ready to get approved, Monday is the meeting, Tuesday is the city council meeting, so they could conceivably vote the plans on Tuesday. And after hearing your concerns about the data and the freshness of the data and that, I think it's going to be very important that the council has before them the finished document. So if you're going to go ahead and update lists of takings, maps, I think it's going to be very important that that's available to them on Monday evening. And I can appreciate the fact that they may influence what ultimately happens and you may have to revise again, but I can appreciate the council not wanting to vote something unless they have current data as it's going to be presented, and there's no question as to what they're approving. So I would just encourage you to have everything available Monday night for the subcommittee, and then they'll pass it on Tuesday night, because they are going to try to move it ahead, but if it's perceived as incomplete or in any way left to update that they're not going to be able to review, you run a risk that it's going to get tabled, and I think we really need to see it move
yeah,
ahead.
and it's really just a map and the table. So I think they
Yes.
can do the map and the table, and those can be independent, not reprint and bind this book. The
Yeah.
map and the insert. If you vote these 4 out, here's the table, here's what the map looks like.
Yeah, we can do that.
And we can do that.
That's going to be very important.
That's kind of what we were going to do.
I didn't realize that the city council meeting was Tuesday, so
Yes.
that was, okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I want to thank Bill and Emily for your time tonight and coming, and I'll definitely be at the meeting. I think one aspect that seems to get a little overlooked in all this is the importance of RDA, City Council, and the planning boards to work together. We really need to be a team, and I've always expressed my excitement about these plans and the city as a whole in the development that we're facing. You know, the success of these modern urban renewal plans in other cities has been tremendous, and I think Florida has that coming. But again, RDA, City Council, Planning Board, we really need to be a team. So I thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
The next item on the agenda is the financial update. Mike is here.
Push over. Push over.
Start throwing things down.
One additional. One additional. All the trial balance. You got glasses. You got glasses. Come on.
And I left mine in the car. My car sees well.
Okay, the first part of the financial update tonight is the income statement for the general operating account, and you have that in front of you. As you can see, this month, there was some bank interest that was received. There were no receipts. There was a transfer that needed to be done, which was done, where a deposit was from the parking garages was put into the wrong account, which has now been done. And also, we had some disbursements of $123,715.80. So your beginning balance at the beginning of the month was $2,296,088.54, and it was reduced by $126,382.11 for an ending balance of $2,169,000. 706.43. So that's your income statement for your general operating. Also, what you have in front of you is your adjusted trial balance. This adjusted trial balance is basically your beginning cash at the beginning of 2017, plus any deposits, less any receipts, and an ending cash balance. This is going to be needed for the audit that is going to be upcoming very soon. The makeup of this report is exactly what I just passed out to you. What you have in front of you is the supporting documentation for the trial balance. It lists all of your expenses by month, by vendor for that year, and then breaks them into categories. And then on your second page, you have all your cash receipts for that year. The left three columns being your parking garage receipts, and then on the right-hand part, your operating receipts and interest, giving you a total receipts for the total year. And then there's some columns below that break into what your deposits were from, the sources of those deposits, being the Seaport Council, Mass Works, Mass Development, Brownfield. And what I needed those for was to make sure that there were any accounts receivable at the end of the year. And as you can see from the Mass Development Brownfield, at the end of the year there was $600,000 worth of receivables, and under the Mass Works there was receivable of $331,390.32. Those two balances were expensed in the prior year, as you see on the right-hand column, for work that was done at the city pier. So that's just basically the backup information for your trial balance. Going to the next report, you have your income statement for your parking garages, and there wasn't very much activity in this month. There was bank interest and also that transfer. So your parking garage account increased from $162,053.49 to $166,417.70. You also have in front of you your warrant schedule for this month. The proposal is to pay $20,158.81 amongst 6 vendors. Basically legal services, an appraisal fee, architectural services, some insurance, and some property tax bills from the town of Freetown. With that warrant being executed, you will have on your next sheet a accounts payable register that shows open payables right now of $15,981. All of these reports were done based on the date of February 12th, 2019. So there has been some invoices that have come in since then, but not many. I think maybe 1 or 2. So that is what you have outstanding right now. And your last report, there's really not much to report on it. The old 2nd Street project, we have paid the first invoice for yard works. We have not paid the 3 change orders that were approved about a month and a half ago. We have not received an invoice on those change orders. Right now the project is in a holding pattern, waiting for the weather to change so that they continue the plantings and finish the project up. I know it's a lot of information. If anybody has any questions, we've been pretty busy in the accounting department.
Anybody have any questions for Mike?
No, it's pretty straightforward.
I have a quick question for the board. And Mike, we have sitting in the bank $2,169,706.42. And I know that we have, coming before us just the utilities for the city pier project and to wrap that project up. I'm just wondering, if looking at the interest we're accruing at Bay Coast, it might be something the bank, we might want to explore a short-term CD to get a little bit better return on our investment, to make some money off of this money we have sitting in the bank. Because it appears, Bay Coast, I mean, they're at, like 1%, 0.75% right now. So I'm just saying, from a financial aspect, when you look at this, I think our money might be better served if we shopped around for short-term CDs. We can definitely put the money short-term somewhere where we could make money on it. So I think we need to consider that. And I don't know if we need a motion to have me reach out to a couple banks or have Mike and see what the rates are, see what the long-term, payback, because it seems with $2 million in the bank, we should be making some.
Yeah,
It seems foolish just to have it sitting in a very low interest paying account.
What does the city do with its cash short-term? There are some limitations on investing public funds, but I'm just curious if
Kathy can answer that. I don't.
Sure, so we have a lot of those resources pooled, and there are very conservative investment options that are done. I think in your particular case, you certainly would want to check just to see if the bank's offering CDs. I think that's reasonable. Even when you say short-term, there's probably a reasonable probability that at least a portion of your funds would not be needed by the Redevelopment Authority, even within a year or perhaps even longer. So I think you could certainly look at doing that. There are some things, there's some, you can't invest funds and then use them for certain things. But I don't think you have to be too concerned. Along those lines, however, we do have, your independent auditors are scheduled to start Monday, so we could certainly check with them to see if they have any thoughts as well as to how you might, proceed accordingly. They're certainly well versed in the regulation.
I think like insured banks, you just have to be careful.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you have to be very careful in terms of how much FDIC covers in deposits. I believe they go up to $500,000, so you probably would want to break that. If you were to do $1 million, you'd want to break it up over 2 lending institutions. Right now, when you do your audit, you will probably be, I don't know if you get a finding, but there would be a concern that you have over the FDIC limit in one bank. So.
Right, I mean, just from a business perspective, when, you've only been giving us these figures for a few months, but from a business perspective, you don't ever put all your eggs in one basket, so why not shop it around and see if, the RDA can make some money on it.
So why don't a vote to authorize the chair to explore different investment opportunities?
I'll make a motion.
So we have a motion for that.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Absolutely, I'll work with Mike.
One of the other things too, and I just want to pique your curiosity, is at some point you're going to have to decide if you're going to do your own accounting through your own accounting system, or if you're going to go into the city's accounting system. My recommendation would be to go with the city's accounting system. It's very detailed. It gives you everything you need. Community development is on the city's accounting system, because a lot of this is being done by hand, and it's just not the best way to do it. Let's put it that way. So it's something you need to think about in the future of where you're planning on going with your accounting system and records.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, something we should consider when we have the full board in front of us, because by hand seems a little archaic. So we definitely want to move into technology and get it. And we don't have anything to hide from anybody, so moving it into the city system might be a good option, so everybody knows what we have and what we're doing with it. Thank you, Michael. And so, Mike, I'll talk to you this week.
Sure.
Reach out to a couple banks and see what the CDs are offering.
So now, do we need, how have we done it before? Do we need a motion to approve the warrant? Have we just been having the chair sign off afterwards? I don't know.
You approve it.
I believe you usually take a vote for it. Kara does sign off on it. The only thing I realized just recently was I don't think you get to see the warrant. And with your signature going on it, from now on, what I think I'll do is drop the warrant off to you when I drop the checks off, just to have you look at it also.
Well, I think on the last, we actually had the notes, though. before I actually
Right.
signed, so I did know
Okay.
what was coming.
I just want to keep everybody in the loop.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody to feel that they're being, not shown the right information.
So she knows what she's signing before she signs it?
Yeah, Kara gets to see it. She gets all the backup. She sees all the invoices and stuff, and we've been bringing the invoices to Lori at her office to have, not the invoices, the checks. So we'll follow up and have the, even if we make a copy for you, so that you have the warrant with the check, so you can take a look at it.
Thank you. So I'll make a motion to approve the warrant.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So, Madam Chair, just before you move off those items, we didn't want to provide a full report, but we have a couple of items. I mentioned the independent auditor, so they'll be starting, but additionally, we have started to have conversation with BVP regarding the accounts that they're holding. They have a capital account, which you may recall, their agreement required that they could not expend those funds without the consent of the Redevelopment Authority. So that account really won't see any real major adjustment. They would need a letter from the Redevelopment Authority allowing those funds to be transferred over to the city, because the city is going to own, does own, I think the deeds have, I don't know if they've been recorded yet, Attorney Coughlin, I'm
No,
not
I was
sure.
waiting for Judge Macy to, I sent the drafts, just waiting for him to say they're in the right form before we sign them.
Okay. So we can follow up with that for you.
They're ready to
Sure.
go. so.
Okay, great. So, because we are going to start making some capital purchases, so and would appreciate having those funds. To Mike's point, the munis accounting system, we need the funds in place before POs can be issued and expenditures can be made. The munis system is very refined in terms of the permissions that are needed in order for the expensive funds. So if that letter could go out to them requesting. Now, they have additional funds in 2 operating accounts. Our expectation would be that they would continue to have control over those funds until they cease to operate. But the capital account, we believe, can move at any point in time, so we'd appreciate
So
that.
why don't we just do a motion to authorize the chair to send a letter to BVP, transfer, we'll just keep it general, all BVP funds transferred to the city with the deeds to the property purchase.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Just let me know if I'm done signing. Do we have anything else underneath the financial update at this time? Thank you very much, Mike and Kathy. So the next item on the agenda is discussion regarding economic developer director position. And I think we're in a unique position, as we all know, to move forward with that. But at the same token, we're in a slightly difficult position because the transition that the city's going through right now. So we have received a little bit of hesitation on some really good applicants, I think, until we get through an election period. Till, some of them are just a little bit hesitant to want to jump on board with the city when the leadership is in question. So I know that I have been in talks with some people that are interested in the position, that have good education backgrounds, have the experience, the passion for the city. I know Kathy has spoken to a couple people, and that seems to be, their main concern right now. The other concern that they have is that the position, we can only offer it for 1 year because we're getting funds from, the block grant. So, the board, we really need to think about, as the funds are available from Mike's office, obviously we would take the funds and use the funds, but what would happen if leadership changed, whether it changes in a few weeks or it changes in November or 2 years down the road? Would we want to then say, offer a 3-year position to the executive director? Because if we're going to get someone really good and lure them here to the city, they want a little bit of stability, and that's another pushback that we're facing. So those two, obviously, I don't think anybody's going to jump on board until after this election. But would we want to consider offering someone a 3-year position? As the funds are available, we would use, Mike's funds. But if, say, it didn't, every new mayor entering in, might have a different vision, and we have to understand and respect that. But if we have someone really good doing their job, would we want to lose them? So would we want to entertain as a board, you know, we do have obviously some money in the bank that would be able to pay for someone. You know, the sixth floor might decide, you know, that they want that person to be part of the city and permanently open up that position and hire someone. We don't know the direction anybody's gonna take. And I think that unknown is stifling a little bit anybody jumping on board with us.
I'm in full agreement with you. My question is, we were paying the funds.
You need to repeat what you said.
I said, I am in full agreement with you. I mean, it's gonna be difficult to get someone to take a position like that if they think they could be gone in a year. No one's gonna quit their job to take a chance, so to say. Again, the Fall River redevelopment, we were paying. So regardless, they were, the funds that we were paying to the Fall River Economic Development was coming out of our money. So what's the difference if we're paying it directly to an employee or we're paying it directly to the contractor, subcontractor?
Michelle, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think that we should drag our feet on this. I think, as much as we're part of the city and we're working for the people of the city, the board is somewhat autonomous and should act as such. And therefore, I certainly wouldn't leave a good job with benefits and somebody say, well, you know, you got a year, and then it's tough luck. I certainly would be in favor of offering the 3-year contract. I don't see any reason why the RDA can't fund the other 2 years. And as you said, you know, if you hire the proper person who's doing the proper job, they're basically going to be creating their own funding,
Should be.
which essentially is what they should be doing. So I have no problem with moving forward, offering a 3-year contract and trying to get somebody on board as soon as possible.
Mike or Kathy, do you have any input for the board on, in your experience,
Sure.
thoughts?
As you mentioned, Madam Chairperson, we have gotten reservations expressed by candidates, specifically with regard to the 1-year contract. And Mr. Dion's funding source requires that he only allow 1-year contracts. So it's not something that we can alter. That's just the limitation. They can't exceed his funding cycle. So in order to offer that multi-year contract, they would have to be employees of the RDA. So that is certainly going to assist us in our negotiations with quality candidates, because they're going to want that stability.
It was my understanding prior to this that the person was going to be an employee of the RDA.
Well, interestingly, it was actually one of your board members. I don't want to refer to someone who's not here to basically defend his position, but one of your board members had some serious reservations about taking on employees. And so I think that's when we started to get creative and consider, well, okay, we can make them an employee of CDA, but then as we got further into the process, we realized that we were limited to the 1-year contract, maybe a 15-month contract, depending upon the funding cycle. But it was actually, as I said, one of your members. And with due respect to him, I mean, clearly when you have employees, you have to take on, you know, all of the obligations, the benefits that are associated with it. And once that employee leaves, you're also responsible for ongoing retirement payments, which you're currently paying now anyway for a former employee, long time ago employee. And I actually had a conversation with Attorney Coughlin today about that, because the reality is if that becomes an obligation of the RDA, if at some point the RDA was no longer active, that retirement obligation would fall to the city of Fall River. So it's not going to create any burden for you beyond your ability to meet that burden and financially absorb that cost. If the day ever comes when that becomes a problem for you, again, it becomes an obligation of the city. So there really is no other downside, if you will, other than that, you know, you do have an employee, you'll be responsible for workers' compensation and other benefits that might be associated with it. But here again, the city is a resource for you, an administrative resource. So we don't anticipate there'd be any problems with you taking on an employee. It's just that as a board, you have to have the willingness to make that commitment to do so. But really, the only hurdle is really the achieving the consensus of the board that you're willing to move in that direction. And then we can include that as part of the negotiation with any prospective candidate.
So I think, how can we get a better understanding of the financial obligations of hiring someone and then the whole, at that salary level, and say, you know, next year if we needed an assistant to him, you know, and all of out-of-the-pocket yearly, so we have a clear understanding of every year what it's going to take out of our budget. Is that something that, you know, you or Mike could just briefly put together, saying this is your workman's comp, this is your insurance, this is everything that you're going to pay out of pocket, and then we have our regular scheduled meeting coming up in March?
March 13th, I think.
If you look at the budget that was presented to you and it's attached to your agreement that you signed with community development, you would see some of those costs. It would give you exactly how much it will cost you. It actually, I think, will be cheaper because you'll be falling under the group insurance from GIC Massachusetts instead of Blue Cross and Blue Shield. That's how you're set up now. You know, one of the things you really have to realize, and Ms. Branco brought it up, is that you were paying somebody to do your work for you. The Community Development Agency is only going to reimburse you for the time spent on job creation and job retention. I have a very set amount of regulations that I have to follow. The Community Development Agency cannot pay for any type of trade shows or any type of marketing of the city of Fall River. So the money that community development is going to reimburse you is going to be for specific items. And for the past 3 or 4 months that I've been working with the RDA, and I know the economic development's not a part of it, but a lot of my time has been spent on accounting and the processing of bills and the writing of letters and you know, consultations with the attorney. So no matter what, you're going to have to hire somebody, and money is going to come out of your budget no matter what. And if you look at the original budget that I put together, there was a small amount, I want to say, I think it was like 15% of that person's salary and expenses and fringe was going to be portioned to the RDA. And I really think that number is really low after doing it. So I think the RDA would have to come up with additional money, even with community development's money. But as the city administrator said, you know, community development is bound by regulations that we cannot commit to more than 1 year's worth of funding. And that's just the way it is. So when we started out in this whole process, we decided, you know, 1 year, because the board did not want an employee, 1 year might suffice. But everybody we speak to, like you said, is looking for more of a commitment. Even if there's a change in administrations in the future, you're still going to need your own staff and your own director to do the stuff that you have in front of you. I mean, you have 2 urban renewal plans, you have a city pier, you have a lot of responsibilities in the future that you're going to need somebody to do, you know, to help and work on that. So I don't see it as a big detriment of hiring your own employee and going forward with that. I always thought it was you know, like she said, we got creative, but you should have your own employee. They shouldn't be an employee of community development. They should be responsible to you. You should be giving them their goals, priorities, what you want to see accomplished. You want to be doing you know, reviews on that person. It gets very, very difficult when one person serves 2 taskmasters, me and the board. So I mean, my recommendation would be definitely for the board to hire their own employee, do a 3-year contract. Community development will be there for you know, as many years as we can be there for you. I mean, we funded the Economic Development Agency prior to RDA for 42 years to the tune of, you know, millions and millions of dollars. So I think it's really based on the quality of the person that you hire, and the background of that person, and, you know, move forward with that person.
Thank you, Mike, and, you know, that's why it was brought up, because I completely agree. I mean, some good candidates are really out there knocking on the door that have passion for the city and are reluctant for that. So I agree, and I think we somehow need to push forward for a 3-year contract for someone and get someone in place. I think,
Yeah.
you know, when it was all brought down to the board maybe 2 years ago, I think, you know, Joe's main opposition was we didn't have all of this white on the cusp. We are on the cusp of these plans, the city piers, you know, in motion, going to design phase, so now we really need someone leading the way. And I think that person should answer to both the RDA and to the city. So I don't know if we want to take a vote, the 3 of us lacking 2 board members, or do we want to wait till the March 13th meeting?
I would say wait for the March 13th meeting. Just, I think, again, they'll agree with us, but just for the sake of really.
Yeah, I think
it
should be an inclusive vote. I do think, though, that we should be proactive in this. Very often, non-action is more detrimental than action, and I think this is one of those situations. So I think it should definitely be on the agenda. The full board should weigh in on it, and I think we should move forward with it.
I agree.
I think too much time has already gone by not addressing it.
And there will be clauses within the employment contract that will protect you regarding performance issues, even regarding an extreme case where there was a funding problem. I mean, you can build those conditions within a contract, and employees expect that there's going to be some of that language in there. So you'll still have control. I think there was some sense that once you have the employee, you kind of own them, but you can put the proper protections within the language of the employment contract, I think, as well. So it might be helpful for us. I'll bring a sample employment contract for that. We'll make it part of your materials for the 13th meeting if this item goes back on the agenda. So you'll have a comfort level that you're going to have an employee, but there is going to be, you know, contractual provisions that protect you as the employer regarding, you know, their activities and their performance.
Yeah, the other thing too, just so you know, Kathy brought it up, is you don't become fully vested in the retirement system till 10 years.
Right.
So you will put some money in as an organization, which is 9% or 15% per year, but that's going to stay there. The person doesn't get fully vested until 10 years, so.
Plus, there will be performance markers and different things that have to be accomplished before, you know, if they don't properly fulfill their duties, then 3 years, you look for someone else. I mean.
But you can even cancel that contract within those 3 years. You don't have to keep that employee.
Yep.
If they're not meeting the benchmarks, or you're not satisfied, or, you know, you can get rid of them.
And that's the point. The contract will have some safeguards in it so that if the employee isn't performing, you're not locked into a 3-year contract. You can do something soon.
So I think what's before the city right now, and with the urban renewal plans and the properties we still have up in the biopark, and I mean, there's so much there that.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, so.
Kathy, could you please get that sample contract to us prior to the meeting?
Yeah.
And Joe, would you please make sure that, John, make sure that it gets on the agenda for us?
The other thing, this is not for tonight, but what we're gonna have to do is the current contract with CDA talks about CDA hiring as an employee, so we're gonna have to amend that contract. But I can work with Mike on that, but that is something we're gonna keep in mind.
That's not an issue at all to amend that. We
Okay,
can amend
thank
that.
you. The next item on the agenda is proposed executive session to discuss strategy with respect to potential litigation regarding city pier project, to review and approve executive session minutes for January 9th, 14th, 24th, and February 19th, and to review and respond to an open meeting open meeting law complaint pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 30A. I have that finding.
So the only question before we go into executive session is, we have the engineering report is number 8. I don't know if we want to discuss that before we go into executive session, or if we want to return back to open session afterwards, but we need to make that
I
call.
think we need to, we would have to come back in, is my opinion. We have to discuss some things in executive session first.
Yeah. All right, so you have the 3 items. We need a motion to go into executive session for those 3. Under item number, letter A, we need a finding from the chair that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body. And we need a roll call vote to go into executive session, and that we will return to open session.
I make that finding.
We need a motion.
Motion to go executive session to discuss items A, B, and C,
I'll make that motion.
And to return.
and return to open.
No, second.
Lori Branco,
Yes.
Michelle Dion,
Yes.
Kara O'Connell, Robert Smith, absent, Joseph Olivera, absent.
Next item is discussion regarding the RQ 19-4 engineering service evaluation of the city pier project. And so everybody, did you get a chance to read each, there were 5 of them, Collins, Fog, Apex, RT, and Monitor.
Mhm.
On an opinion base, we did hear, you know, we had a last meeting, the city's thoughts on the engineering. I had some thoughts. I did rank Foth as getting the highest marks in my book, followed by RT. Lori, did you do any rankings or have any thoughts
Didn't.
on who jumped out at you?
I didn't rank any of them, but I did like 4. But I didn't go through the whole ranking system.
How about you, Michelle?
I have them all here.
To date, I've been happy with Fourth, and I thought they came out on top also. And we actually have somewhat of a comfortable relationship, I think, at this point, that I feel confident in their work and their capabilities. So I would be good with that.
With that being said, I'd like to make a motion to authorize Kathy Ann to reach out to Fourth Engineering and to ask them to submit us a price for their services. And have that available for us at our next meeting.
We'll bring it back to the next meeting.
Yeah,
We're
bring it
fine.
back to the next meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
And on that motion, I just want to acknowledge that Terry Sullivan and Paul Ferlin did evaluate. I want to acknowledge the city staff that took the time to go over the documents. They both ranked Foth Engineering as their top choice. And I also did some engineering, did some review as well. Foth seems to be the unanimous first place preference.
So go ahead and vote. All in favor?
Aye.
So now, I just need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
And I'll second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.